This is Kim Meyer, host of Choose to Rise. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media.
The latest headlines.
The Houston Astros, the defending World Series champions, got better adding Garrett Cole.
The insightful interviews.
Rick Saratella, NFL Draft Bible. With how much emphasis is put on the position, yet how many over the last couple of years we've had questions. Why do we put such an emphasis on drafting a quarterback number one overall?
The bottom line is there's not enough good quarterbacks to go around. And I think with the new CBA, it's really a low-risk gamble now. If you look at the playoff teams, the common denominator, good quarterback play.
The hottest takes.
I think the guy to blame is the one guy who hasn't left yet. I think Russell Westbrook is one of the bigger problems in Oklahoma City.
Can all be found on Press Row. Broadcasting is part of the Public House Media Network. Here's your host.
It doesn't matter what your name is.
Christian Heimall.
Welcome back, everybody, on Press Row. Christian Heimall here with you, broadcasting as part of the Public House Media Network on this Thursday, November 7th, 2019. So happy to have you guys as a part of the show. As always, you can find us wherever you get your podcasts via Apple or Google Play, iHeartRadio, Spreaker.com, Stitcher.com, or, of course, publichousemedia.org, where you can go and get some awesome show gear, help support the podcast, and support Public House Media sports in general. We're going to get to your listener questions, which, by the way, you guys can submit, and you always do. Twitter and Instagram handle at PressRowPHM. You can email the show, PressRowPHM@gmail.com, or you can find us on Facebook, Press Row Podcast by Public House Media. We got a lot of people reaching out almost immediately after the UFC 244 main event this past weekend, so we're going to touch on that. We're going to touch on the college football playoff as well. A couple other things here as we get right into the heart of one of the best times of the year for sports fans. You've got the NFL right at the midway point. You've got college basketball just started up this week. The NBA is a couple weeks in now. The first college football playoff rankings were announced earlier this week. Hockey's in session. Baseball literally just ended a week ago. Congrats to the Washington Nationals on their first World Series title. But it's just a smorgasbord of sports, and I've said that multiple times on this show. November is probably the best month for a sports fan. October, November, they're two of the best ones. Obviously, March and April with the start of everything and playoffs kicking into gear, and, of course, March Madness. But this is one of the top 3 months to be a sports fan, and it's a great time to be one, and a lot of great storylines going on. One of the biggest ones coming out of the weekend, maybe not so much now towards the end of the week, but it is one that a lot of people have been talking about, is what happened at UFC 244, Madison Square Garden, the BMF title, the baddest MFer title between Nate Diaz and Jorge Masvidal at welterweight. This was the one that, for those of you who didn't know and don't know, was stopped after the third round. Doctor stoppage because of a massive cut over Nate Diaz's right eye. There are a couple of big issues with this, and a lot of fans were upset about it. Masvidal was upset. Diaz was upset. The Rock, who was presenting the BMF title, was visibly upset. Even Dana White, at the start of the whole thing, right when the title got announced, right when the stoppage was made, he was visibly annoyed by it. And it seemed as though many of the announcers and reporters, and if you watch social media, it was an absolute firestorm of people just annoyed and upset about the decision by the doctor of the New York State Athletic Commission, to decide and stop this fight. And there's a big thing that we need to note here. For those of you who watched, Joe Rogan, the color commentator, interviewed both fighters after the fight, and after speaking with Nate Diaz, literally said, well, let's do this, let's get this rematch again and get it done in Vegas. He did that for a reason, and few people picked up on it, but he said it for an exact reason. In New York State, the New York State Athletic Commission picks their own physicians for any combat sport. They have their own physicians on site for any athletic event, professionally speaking, as an independent third party, basically, for the better safety of all competitors. In Vegas, that doesn't happen. The Nevada State Athletic Commission allows the fight promoter to choose its own from a sanctioned group of physicians. So that's part of the issue. Number one is that, and a lot of people say that because it's Nate Diaz, because he's had so many fights before where he has been in much worse shape and actually won fights, or because that the UFC could have picked their own physician who maybe knows the fact that Nate Diaz has so much scar tissue over his right eye that literally you flick him and he starts to bleed, would have allowed that fight to continue because it was starting to get great right at that point. The first 2 rounds were 1,000% dominated by Jorge Masvidal, and we're starting to be a little leaning towards kind of a walk for Masvidal. The third round got really entertaining, really exciting. You started to see what could come in the 4th and 5th round, so it's very disappointing to see it end the way that it did, and it's one of those things that the New York State Athletic Commission has to work on. Now, Dana White said all the right things in the post-fight press conference where he said, I didn't like it at the start, but then I walked back to the locker room and I saw Diaz's eye and his eyelid was flipped over. He's saying the right things because he knows that from a money standpoint, you have to fight in New York. And if he goes in there, the post-fight press conference, and he blasts the New York State Athletic Commission, he might lose that opportunity for the UFC to fight in New York ever again. And when you consider the hotbeds of New Jersey, Long Island, Pennsylvania, and all those areas that are so close for combat sports, and the fact that it's the Mecca, Madison Square Garden, the world's most famous arena, and you may never be allowed to fight there again, that's not something they fought so hard for years, for decades, to get a fight in Madison Square Garden, and there's no way in hell Dana White's going to lose that opportunity because of a poor stoppage. Was it a poor stoppage? In my opinion, yes, because you have to know the fighters. You have to know who's in the ring. You have to know the fan base as well. You can't jeopardize an athlete's safety. Of course you can't do that, and I'm not saying that by any stretch of the imagination. But Nate Diaz has been around for the better part of 20 years. He has taken beatings, literally had his face caved in, and won fights and continued in fights like that. He's one of those guys. He is the toughest. He is, in my opinion, the BMF in UFC right now because of the amount of just a beating that he can take and still continuously fight at a high level. Masvidal is right there, and I think he would have won that title anyway if it had gone a full 5 rounds had he not been able to finish Diaz, or had Diaz not finished him. I think Masvidal would have won a decision in that fight, clearly, in my personal opinion. But you have to know that Nate Diaz is not in any danger at that point. Obviously, you've got to protect these guys from themselves, and we've had this conversation with the NFL and that players are never going to call themselves out for a concussion. That's why there's a third-party independent person there on the field to examine every concussion and immediately put them in concussion protocol. But you've got to know Nate Diaz. You've got to know that this dude has literally had his orbital bone broken and won a fight. He's literally had broken bones. He's had his face beaten to a pulp. He has been completely covered in his own blood and still choked somebody out. It's what Nate Diaz has made his career off of, and you have to let that happen and let that continue into the 4th round. You can stop that fight, and you have to trust that the referee, Dan Mergliotta, one of the best in the business, is going to stop that fight if he sees that Nate Diaz is in serious medical trouble. You have to trust that, especially considering that in that arena, in this sport, for that fight, this was an opportunity to really separate the UFC to another level, into another stratosphere, that they were entertaining this idea that Nate Diaz had of the baddest MFer in the UFC. This was an idea. That's not a legitimate belt. That's not a real title. Nobody's going to put that on the cornerstone in their resume. It's going to be something a little at the bottom footnote thing. It's not a real championship belt, but it was something that, an idea that morphed into this thing that is absolutely incredible, and I hope like hell that they get a rematch in Vegas where Nate Diaz can really show out and really get that fight to a 4th and a 5th round, because that is what the fans deserve. That is what that fight deserved. That is what the UFC needs to have, because otherwise there's going to be an issue. Now, my other big issue here with Dana White is that he says he doesn't think that's the right fight to book. What else are you going to do? Jorge Masvidal has nothing to fight right now. He's got the winner of Kamaru Usman and Colby Covington coming up next month at 245 for the welterweight belt. Maybe. But until that time, here's what you do. You get this fight right back in January, and then you book that Masvidal Usman Covington fight for June of next year. Diaz is going to be ready. What you do is you put this fight Masvidal Diaz on the same card as Conor McGregor's return, and you make absolute bank on that pay-per-view and on that gate. You charge whatever you want. People will pay for it to see those four guys. Whoever Conor McGregor is fighting, hopefully it's Donald Cowboy Cerrone, but we'll see what that is. But that's the one that you do. January 18th, you make that fight happen. Diaz versus Masvidal rematch, McGregor, Cerrone, and you can make McGregor, Cerrone the co-main event, and you make Masvidal Diaz rematch the main event, because that's what people wanted to see. Everybody who watched that fight on Saturday immediately said, do a rematch, because the ending was not what they wanted. And please, for the love of God, do it in Vegas, where you have people who understand the sport, who understand the fighters that are actually competing in this thing, and who understand the fact that that is what the UFC needs, that is what the fans have earned, and that is what the fighters have earned more than anything else. That is what you need. Get it done in Vegas and prove that you're actually listening to the fans of the UFC, and you're not going the ways of some other combat sports or sports entertainment and not listening to their fans to get what they exactly want. When we come back, we're going to touch on the college football playoff poll. A lot of questions about that as well. Your listener questions are coming up in just a little bit. Don't go anywhere. You are on Press Row, broadcasting as part of the Public House Media Network.
Want to be part of the show? Go to Facebook and search Press Row Podcast Public House Media, or find us on Twitter and Instagram at Press Row PHM. You can also email the program, pressrowphm@gmail.com.
Hi, this is Peggy Rojas, host of Viviendo una Vida en Balance here at Public House Media. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media. Once you're done with this episode, I hope you can come back and check my show, Viviendo una Vida en Balance, where we talk about life hacks to live a life in balance. And this show's in Spanish. A new show comes out every Monday, so don't forget to subscribe on iTunes and share with your friends. Again, thank you for checking out the following broadcast in Public House Media.
This is Press Row with Christian Heimall, a Public House Media podcast.
Welcome back on Press Row. Christian Heimall here with you, broadcasting as part of the Public House Media Network. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. Share us with your friends and family. You can find us on Apple and Google Play. You can find us on Spreaker.com, Stitcher.com, iHeartRadio, wherever you get your podcast, Podbean, all that fun stuff. And, of course, you can find us on publichousemedia.org. We just touched on UFC 244 this past weekend, UFC 245. Umar, and Colby Covington coming up in just a couple of weeks. We'll see the winner of that probably against Jorge Masvidal, but who knows. One thing that we literally know nothing about is the college football playoff rankings, because they came out this past Tuesday, and I'll be honest, I was shocked. I really was. But I was pleasantly shocked, and here's why. Ohio State, LSU, Alabama, Penn State, Clemson. Those are your top five in the college football playoff rankings. I'm shocked at the fact that Clemson is not in the top four, and I am shocked that Alabama's not number one. But I am so happy about it for a number of reasons. Because for the longest period of time, the only answer I could really give when people say, why is Clemson up here? Why is Alabama up here when they haven't played anybody? And the answer has always been, well, what have they done to lose it? What have they done to lose it? They're the defending national champs, or they came into the season projected to be the best team in the country. Now, what we're unequivocally seeing in the AP poll, in the coaches poll, and now in the college football playoff poll is that if your non-conference sucks and your strength of schedule is terrible, you are not going to be rewarded by your namesake. And I'm so happy we've finally gotten to this point. Ohio State passes the eye test. They are the best team in the country. Statistically, when you look at all the things that they can do in their on both sides of the ball, offense and defense, Ohio State is the best team in the country. They deserve to be number one. LSU is very close behind that as well because of what they are able to do throughout the course of this season. Joe Burrow, Heisman Trophy favorites, one of them at least, very talented. And of course, when you look at what LSU has done, they at least have something on their resume a win at Texas, 45-38, 9th-ranked Texas, and a win over 7th-ranked Florida and 9th-ranked Auburn. They have 3 quality wins. LSU deserves to be up there. Alabama does not deserve to be in the top 4 right now, in my opinion. They're number 3 solely off of their win at Texas A&M when they were, at the time, ranked 24th. Other than that, you've got New Mexico State, you've got Duke, you've got Southern Mississippi as some of your other wins for Alabama. Nothing too exciting. Here's the big one. Clemson. Clemson, the defending national champions, sitting on the outside looking in right now despite being 9-0. Why? Because guess what? Georgia Tech is not a great win. Syracuse is not a great win. Charlotte is an embarrassing win. The fact that you almost lost at North Carolina should be an embarrassing win. Louisville is not exciting. Boston College, Wofford in week 9. Are you kidding me with this schedule? This is an embarrassment to the number 1 team, to the defending national champion. And Dabo Swinney and the coaching staff and the athletic department should be ashamed that that's the schedule they're putting together. Now, I know this is a lot of stuff that you can't put together realistically years in advance because you've got to schedule 3-4 years in advance. But that is a fundamental problem when it comes to these rankings, because if you're going to try to say that you deserve to be in by beating Wofford 59-14, you've got bigger issues. Let's look at the strength of schedule real quick, just so that people understand. Ohio State is ranked 3rd from a strength of schedule. Penn State is ranked 7th. When you look at Alabama, they're at 17th. You look at Clemson, they are even further down that list at 42. They don't have the strength of schedule. They're not a legitimate title contender based off of who they have played and who they have on their schedule. So it's really not that surprising to see them out there. I love the fact that now what we are starting to see is this college football playoff committee look at the fact that you haven't played anybody. Guess what? That means you don't get to actually be in this thing. It's not possible. It's not something that we're going to allow anymore for this. The fact that just because you're the defending national champion, or just because you're the best team in the ACC might as well be a high school conference. They are that bad right now. Wake Forest has been talented, yes, but other than that, there's nobody in the ACC that is worth talking about as a legitimate win for this Clemson team. They got NC State on the road this weekend, and then they have 19th ranked Wake Forest at home before finishing up against South Carolina. Woo-hoo. This means absolutely nothing. And then they'll probably end up playing Virginia or Pitt in the ACC title game, which again means nothing. The games that really matter, the SEC and the Big Ten. Penn State sitting in there at 4th, I really like because, again, big wins at Iowa, 17th in the country, against Michigan, 16th in the country. This weekend, they've got 17th ranked Minnesota, and oh, by the way, they go to Ohio State coming up at the end of the year. That's going to be a huge one. Of course, Alabama, LSU coming up here at the end at the end of this weekend. So those are the 2 big ones that are really, really important. But I love the fact that the College Football Playoff Committee is finally saying, you know what, we don't care what you've done last year. Your schedule is your schedule. We're not going to bonus you just because you're the defending national champions or because you started out the year preseason number 1, 2, or 3. If you haven't played anybody, if you don't have a good strength of schedule, that is on you for not scheduling it. Which brings me back to a point I mentioned just a couple seconds ago. The fact that these schedules get made so far in advance needs to change. This is not something that is very difficult to do. The NFL, they announce their schedule maybe a couple of weeks before their season and the prior season ends. Major League Baseball, minor league baseball, the same exact way. The NBA, the same exact way. The fact that college teams, baseball, softball, lacrosse, even college basketball teams are still finalizing their schedule in March and in April for that coming fall. Why can't college football do the exact same thing? Why can't Clemson sit there and right after they know what their ACC schedule is going to be and they've got 3 or 4, let's say, non-conference games, why can't they go in and say, you know what, we're not going to really schedule these until after the season ends in January. Then we've got February, March, April, May, June, July, August. We've got 7 months to plan this. You look at their non-conference, Texas A&M, Charlotte, and Wofford. Those are the 3 non-conference games you put together as the defending national champions. You can't tell me that you're going to go in there after you win the national title and say, you know what, maybe we do this instead. Let's go and take on Texas A&M. Fine, let's keep that one. But let's go and play Penn State. Let's go and play Oregon. Let's go play Auburn and actually make a great non-conference schedule. The fact that it can't be done is a stupid and asinine idea, and one that has to change for these programs, much like Alabama, same exact thing, Duke, New Mexico State, Southern Miss. I'm sorry, you can easily go out and play in Ohio State. Last year they played Florida State right at the start. I know it didn't work out very well, but they can do this type of thing where they go and they play a Utah, in Oklahoma, right out of the gate, and they make their case that much better. Again, Penn State, they didn't have anybody great in their non-conference. Idaho, Buffalo, Pitt, nothing exciting there. But they have the opportunity because of their strength of schedule going in, because they're not in a god-awful conference like the SEC. Like the SEC West and like the ACC in that sense. Similar to Oklahoma, a team that I'm going to talk about a little bit because we've had a couple of questions regarding Oklahoma, but Houston, South Dakota, UCLA, those aren't that sexy. So when you lose to a Kansas State, it does really hurt your playoff chances because you don't have that quality non-conference win to go out and get. College football and these athletic directors need to change their mindset of planning 3-4 years out and hoping that they're going to be good enough to get into the college football playoff, because now the committee is finally saying it does not matter what you did the year before or how you started the year in the rankings. If you don't have a great strength of schedule and you're not actually beating these teams like you're supposed to, you don't get in. And I can very easily see a scenario where Alabama and Clemson, being one-loss teams, don't get into the college football playoff. And honestly, good, because that's going to make college football that much more exciting. Nobody wants to sit there and watch Ohio State whoop up on, Idaho, North Dakota State. Nobody wants to see that. Nobody wants to watch Oklahoma beat South Dakota 70-14. No, they want to watch them play a close game with Texas 34-27. That's what they want to see throughout the course of this year, and that's what college football needs, better non-conference scheduling. When we get back from the break, we'll close up shop. Your listener questions, it's all coming up in just a little bit. You're listening to Press Row, broadcasting as part of the Public House Media Network.
Listen to every episode and get the latest shows sent right to you. Subscribe to Press Row on iTunes, Google Play, iHeartRadio, Spreaker.com, and Stitcher.com. Or visit us online at www.thephmedia.com.
This is Jenna Burt, host of the Confessions of a Military Spouse podcast here on Public House Media. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media. Once you're done with this episode, I hope you'll come check out my show, Confessions of a Military Spouse, where we dig deep and talk about the unspoken hard truths of what it's really like to be a military spouse. A new show comes out bi-weekly. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes so you never miss an episode of Confessions of a Military Spouse. Thanks again for checking out the following broadcast on Public House Media.
This is Press Row with Christian Heimall, a Public House Media podcast.
Wrap up shop here on Press Row like we do every single week this Thursday, November 7th, 2019, with your listener questions, which you can submit on social media via Twitter and Instagram at PressRowPHM. You can email the show, PressRowPHM@gmail.com, or you can find us on Facebook, Press Row Podcast by Public House Media. You guys have been asking a lot of questions. We touched on UFC, we touched on the college football playoff. Get to some of your listener questions as well. Brandon, first one to ask, Patriots, after losing to Baltimore on Sunday night, can they still be considered the best team in the AFC? Statistically, yes. They're 8-1, which is the best record in the AFC. They have the highest point differential of any team in the NFL at plus 172. Their one loss being on the road to a very good Baltimore team. Yes, it was by 17 points, and no, the Patriots did not look very good. That was their first real true test of the season, but I think the Patriots can still be considered the best team in the AFC, maybe the best team in the entire NFL. I know San Francisco is the only undefeated team. The Saints at 7-1. Packers at 7-2, though they didn't look very good against the Chargers this past weekend. But here's my issue with the New England Patriots, and this is kind of what we were just talking about with Clemson with regards to the ACC. The New England Patriots will always be one of the best teams in the NFL from a statistics standpoint because more than a third of their games are played against the atrocious AFC East. The Miami Dolphins, the New York Jets, the Buffalo Bills, who despite being 6-2, I think are a very misleading 6-2. We'll see how that pans out. So the Patriots are always going to be one of those best teams because they don't play anybody. 6 of their 16 games are against some of the worst teams in the NFL, the Dolphins and the Jets combining for just 2 wins, and one of them being against the other one. So it'd be very hard-pressed to find another division where the bottom 2 teams are that bad. The only other division similar to that, to be 100% honest, is the AFC North, where the Browns and the Bengals are combined 2 for 14, same as the Jets and the Dolphins. The Bengals, of course, winless at 0-8 this year. But I think the Patriots still can be considered that. My biggest problem, and I've always had this with the Patriots, in the Belichick-Brady era, even though they are the greatest tandem of all time, Brady's the greatest quarterback, Belichick's the greatest coach of all time, my problem is that they've never had a power running game. They've never had that one back that you can just feed the ball to, that Frank Gore, Le'Veon Bell, Ron Dane type, Mike Allstott, type player, Jerome Bettis, you can just give the ball to and let them bulldoze the defensive line. Because I was at that game Sunday night, Patriots and the Ravens, watched every single play of it, and there were multiple times with the Patriots inside the red zone, they're lining up in shotgun with an empty backfield because they know they can't run the football against anybody, especially against a Ravens team that has always been known, a franchise that has always been known as a great run defensive team. So it's been my one knock on the Patriots their entire existence in this era of Brady and Belichick is that they don't have a true dominant power running game. If they had that, they would be unquestionably the best team in the NFL. If they had a Le'Veon Bell type, if they had a Todd Gurley, a Mark Ingram type even, Alvin Kamara, they would be a very talented, probably a runaway favorite every single year if they had that power running game, but they don't. They have James White, who's a pass catcher out of the backfield. The last true running back I think they had was Corey Dillon years and years ago, and they won a Super Bowl with that. So that's always been my biggest knock with regards to the Patriots. Let's see here. Max asking, now that JD Martinez has decided to stay, can the Red Sox afford to keep both him and Mookie Betts? Yes, it's difficult, though. The Red Sox ownership has said that they want to stay under the first luxury tax threshold of $208 million. Their payroll this year was $240, so they got to find a way to cut $32 million. How do they do that? Well, you've got free agents in Rick Porcello, Mitch Moreland, Steve Pearce, Andrew Kashner, Julius Chassin, and Brock Holt. Out of those guys, there are really only 2 you have to bring back, in my opinion. Porcello and Brock Holt. Steve Pearce is a World Series MVP. He's injured. Probably was going to retire. Mitch Moreland, again, you can't really get him for more than the $6 million. You shouldn't pay more than the $6 million that you paid over the last couple of years. But you're going to have to find a way to be 1,000% honest, trade some of these players. You're going to have to trade a couple of guys. It could be one of those guys, maybe like a Jackie Bradley Jr., maybe a Heath Embry. Maybe you can even go in and just go absolutely crazy and maybe trade a bunch of young guys to go and get someone who's already controlled, like a Noah Syndergaard type. However, to get Noah Syndergaard, you're going to have to give up probably Mookie Betts. So the Red Sox can do it. They have to get very creative and maybe not bring back someone like a Brock Holt, who deserves a lot of money because of what he can do for this team and has never really been the kind of guy that the Red Sox were going to invest a lot of money in, even though he certainly 1,000% deserves it. All right, last one here. We had asked via email, which team outside the top 4 do you see most likely getting in to the college football playoff? Well, I have 4 teams, and there are some caveats to each one of these. The first one is the Oregon Ducks. If they can win the Pac-12, if they run the table, you know for a fact, again, Ohio and Penn State play each other later this year. Alabama and LSU play each other this weekend. So at least 2 of these teams will probably get knocked out. Oregon currently sitting at 7th, 8-1. They're going to end up probably facing Utah in the Pac-12 championship game. If they beat Utah and they run the table here, Oregon's got wins at 25th ranked Washington and would eventually have a win over Utah in the Pac-12 championship. They'd have that conference championship check mark. Their only loss start of the year to a very talented Auburn team that has just continuously gotten better. So Oregon, I think, is my first shot. The second one is probably not a big stretch. They're just barely outside. It's the Georgia Bulldogs at 6. Georgia, again, their lone loss, it's not a good one, especially at home against South Carolina. But if they're able to run this table, they will end up likely facing the winner of Alabama LSU in the SEC championship game. They will then beat that team, which will then give that team 2 losses, and them only having 1, the SEC championship checkmark as well. Wins over Auburn, win over Notre Dame, win over Florida, all ranked teams, win over Alabama or LSU. That's 4 top 10 ranked victories for Georgia. I could easily see them getting in as well. Same thing, staying in the SEC and staying in the SEC West with Auburn. The Auburn Tigers, despite being 7-2, I think still have a chance to get into the college football playoff. They have to win out, which of course means beating Georgia next weekend. It of course means beating Alabama at the end of the year. If you do both of those things and you finish the season at 10-2 and you have wins over Oregon, potentially a Pac-12 champion, Texas A&M who is ranked, Georgia who is ranked, Alabama who is ranked, your only losses would end up being to Florida and LSU. Florida, a 2-loss team, maybe they get in, but they also could end up losing to Georgia as well. And then potentially with your victory over Alabama, let's say LSU beats Alabama this weekend, and then Auburn beats Alabama. You're both 2-loss teams. You're not going to get in that sense. Alabama probably wouldn't get in over Auburn because Auburn beat them. LSU, if they go on to win the SEC title game and things go all sorts of crazy in the Big Ten, I could see Auburn being the second SEC team that gets in over a team like Clemson, despite them running the table and winning the ACC tournament. I could easily see it being in Ohio State, Oregon, Clemson, and then Auburn potentially get in, or Ohio State, Georgia, whoever the SEC champion, Georgia/LSU, Auburn, Clemson. I could see Auburn getting into this. And then the last team, and the one that might be a little out there, is the Oklahoma Sooners. The Sooners, despite that just embarrassing loss at home, on the road against Kansas State, still one of the most impressive teams, because at the end of this year, if they were to end up running the table the rest of the way, that means not only would they have beaten Texas at home, a top 15 ranked team, they would have beaten Baylor twice because of the Big 12 championship game. They've got Baylor coming up in 2 weeks on the road. They beat them then, and then they beat Oklahoma State at the end of the year. Then they play Baylor again in the Big 12 championship game on a neutral site and beat them again. That's another top 15 win. That's a top 25 win. There'd be 4 top 25 wins for Oklahoma. Again, a lot of things have to go crazy in the SEC and the Big Ten as well. But I could see Oklahoma a scenario where the Sooners are able to find redemption and get back in. I don't see a good scenario. I don't see a likely scenario, but I see one where the Sooners could potentially get back into the college football playoff. Which one do I think is actually going to happen? I think it's Oregon. I think at the end of this whole thing, I really do think the top 4 in no particular order will be Ohio State, LSU, Clemson, and Oregon. I think that will be the final 4 that you see in the college football playoffs coming up here in January. Is it going to change? Could it change? Likely, yes, and a lot of it will be at the end of this weekend when Alabama and LSU do battle, the first of many big tests the rest of the way in college football. As always, we appreciate your listener questions. We appreciate your guys' support of the show. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, review, share us with your friends and family on Spreaker.com, Stitcher.com, iHeartRadio, Apple, and Google Play, and of course, PublicHouseMedia.org. Don't forget to find us on social media. Just search Press Row by Public House Media, and I'll see you next time on Press Row.